Class, and welcome to chapter 5. This chapter will be the last chapter in this module. So after this chapter, we'll have a lecture exam on chapters 1, 2, 4, and 5. This chapter is a lot smaller. It's about the integumentary system, which includes, first and foremost, our skin, which is our largest organ. It accounts for about 7% of our body weight. It's divided into two distinct layers, the epidermis and the dermis. The hypodermis lies deep to the dermis, and it's composed of areolar and adipose tissues. It's not part of the integumentary system, but it does share some of the skin's properties. So here's a look at the skin structure, and for lab, you will need to know the different structures in the skin. This is a great slide to kind of pause, look at, screenshot, to help with some of your lab handout as well. And we'll be going over these skin structures now. So the gross structure of the skin and the underlying tissue. So this is a look at a human cadaver, showing us where the epidermis lies. So that's the first most superficial layer of the skin. Then we have the dermis, the hypodermis, the deep fascia, and then underneath that, we eventually get to muscle. So that's how the skin is layered. There's 5 important functions of the skin. It helps them to protect, cushions organs, protects from bumps, chemicals, water loss, and UV radiation. It helps to regulate your body temperature with the capillary network and sweat glands, regulating heat loss. It works in excretion, so it gets rid of urea, salts, and water loss due to sweat. Other functions, it helps to produce vitamin D, which is important for absorbing calcium from the GI tract. And it also helps with sensory reception. So it contains sense organs associated with nerve endings. So we'll first talk about the epidermis, and the epidermis is composed of keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. It contains 4 main cell types: keratinocytes, which are located in one of the layers called the stratum spinosum. They produce a protein called keratin, which is very fibrous, protective. Melanocytes are located in the basal layer, and they manufacture and secrete the pigment melanin, which helps to give people different skin colors. Tactile epithelial cells are in the basal layer. They are attached to sensory nerve endings. And dendritic cells are a part of the immune system. So they help to fight off infection. They're macrophage-like, so they will engulf or eat anything foreign. Keratinocytes are the most abundant cell type. They produce keratin, which is a tough fibrous protein. They also produce some antibodies and enzymes, and they are dead at your skin surface. Then these are the layers of the epidermis that you should know. There's 5 layers. One of the layers, the stratum lucidum, is only in thick skin, and I guarantee that'll probably be a lecture question. So the stratum lucidum is only found in thick skin, and these are the other layers of the epidermis. So these are the 5 layers seen here, working from most superficial to deep, and the different layers of the epidermis. Here's a different look at an artist's rendition of the epidermis. Sometimes it's fun to see a microscope, and it's also nice to see an artist's rendition because they could sometimes make it a little clearer. The stratum basale then is the deepest layer of the epidermis. It's attached to the underlying dermis. Cells will be actively dividing, and then the stratum basale contains tactile epithelial cells, which are those that are associated with the sensory nerve endings, and also melanocytes, which secrete the pigment melanin. So the stratum basale, that's where we're at right now. So we're going to work our way up, going through the 5 layers of the epidermis. The stratum spinosum, sometimes called the spiny layer because it has a spiny appearance. It contains thick bundles of intermediate filaments. It resists tension and contains the protein pre-keratin. And this is where we see your dendritic cells, which are a type of macrophage, which are important in the immune system. The stratum granulosum has few layers of keratinocytes. The keratinocytes contain these granules that will form the keratin, that protective protein pigment, and also lamellar granules, which contain a waterproofing glycolipid. And above the stratum granulosum, the cells are too far from dermal capillaries to receive any nourishment. And again, this is important The stratum lucidum only occurs in thick skin, and it's located in parts of thick skin where you have thicker skin throughout the body, like the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. And it's just composed of few rows of flat, dead keratinocytes. And then we have the stratum corneum, more layers of dead keratinocytes, thickened plasma membrane. This layer will protect the skin against abrasion and penetration. The dermis is then the second major region of the skin located below the epidermis. It's strong, flexible connective tissue, and it has two layers, the papillary dermis, which includes the dermal papilla, and the reticular dermis, which is the deeper layer, about 80% of that. The papillary dermis includes the dermal papilla, which increase the surface area for the exchange of gases, nutrients, and wastes with the epidermis above it. The dermal papilla lie on dermal ridges, and epidermal ridges, called friction ridges, are elevations of the dermal papilla. And these are also known as fingerprints, which increase the gripping ability of hands and feet. Then the reticular dermis is right below that. That accounts for about 80% of the dermal thickness. The dense irregular connective tissue gives the reticular dermis what we call cleavage lines, which separate collagen fibers. Collagen fibers give the skin its strength, and flexure lines are deep creases in the palms, wrists, soles, fingers, and toes, which you can see on your hand. The reticular dermis has a rich nerve supply. It has two vascular plexuses, dermal plexus, subpapillary plexus. What that just means is there's a rich nerve supply to the dermis. Blood vessels also play an important role in temperature regulation in this layer. So here's a look at some dermal modifications. Cleavage lines, first of all, represent separations between underlying collagen bundles. They run circularly around the trunk and longitudinally in the limbs. And one kind of cool thing is that right here it talks about how surgical incisions parallel to cleavage lines will heal better than those made across them. Here are flexure lines, which we all have in our hands that you can look at, where the dermis is closely attached to underlying structures. And here's a look at friction ridges or fingertips. The hypodermis then is deep to the skin. It's also called superficial fascia. It contains areolar and adipose connective tissue, and it anchors the skin to underlying structures. It helps insulate the body, and it has a little bit of a different distribution versus male and females. In terms of what determines skin color, there's three pigments that are associated with that. Melanin is the most important pigment. So that's number one. Carotene is a yellow-orange pigment from carrots and tomatoes. And hemoglobin, Caucasian skin contains little melanin, and hemoglobin allows more of a crimson color of blood to show through. Nails then are part of your integumentary system. So we'll go through hair, skin, and nails. Nails are made of hard keratin. These are the parts of the nails that you should just briefly know. I won't ask you too many questions about nails. The nail folds, the eponychium, which is the cuticle. And here's a look at the structure of a nail, the free edge, the nail plate, the lateral nail fold. The lunula is this lune-shaped white part that we're all familiar with seeing. And then the eponychium is the cuticle. The big thing I want to point out too is the nail matrix is where nail cells are actively growing. So in the nail matrix, new cells grow and continue to push out old cells toward the free edge. Hair then is a flexible strand of dead keratinized cells. It's hard keratin. The chief parts of the hair are the root and the shaft. The root is embedded in the skin, and the shaft projects above the skin surface. The hair has three concentric layers of keratinized cells: the medulla, the cortex, and the cuticle. And we can see these three layers here, the cuticle, cortex, and medulla of the hair follicle itself. And then the hair shaft is what sticks out above the hair surface. We usually have sebaceous glands associated with hairs. They secrete an oily substance that nourishes the hair and keeps it from drying out. And then we have this erector pili muscle, which causes you to have goosebumps. So it holds your hair up on its end. So here's a photomicrograph of a cross-section of a hair and a hair follicle, and you can see the different layers labeled there. The hair follicles extend from the epidermis to the dermis. The hair bulb is the deep expanded end of the hair follicle, and the root plexus is the knot of sensory nerves around the hair bulb. So you can see here a little bit more what makes up the hair root, the hair matrix, the follicular wall, and so forth. Here's a photomicrograph of a longitudinal view of the hair bulb in the follicle. So again, the hair bulb lies in the follicle, and that's what causes the hair to grow. The wall of the hair follicle is peripheral connective tissue sheath, glassy, epithelial root, and this is a big one. I also want you to know the erector pili muscle is a bundle of smooth muscle and that makes the hair stand erect when the erector pili contracts, such as in goosebumps or stressful situations. You have different types of hair. Body hairs of women and children are called vellus. Terminal hairs are hairs of the scalp and at the pubic area and axillary, the armpit. Hair thinning and baldness is due to aging, and male pattern baldness can also be genetic. Sebaceous glands are then over the entire body, except palms and soles, and they secrete sebum, an oily substance. What this does, most of sebaceous glands are associated with the hair follicle, and they help to collect dirt, soften, and lubricate the hair and the skin. So here's a look at skin glands, and here's a sebaceous gland secreting an oily sebum, so most often associated with a hair. Sweat glands are more widely distributed on the body. Sweat is a blood filtrate, so it has some waste products, most of it's water, some salts, and some traces of metabolic wastes like urea, ammonia, and uric acid. So here's a look, here's the sebaceous gland secreting oil that we just talked about, and the sweat gland or eccrine gland secreting sweat to the surface of the skin. There's two types of sweat glands, eccrine and apocrine. Eccrine are the most numerous, producing true sweat. Apocrine are in your armpit, that's the axillary, anal, and genital areas. They produce more of a special kind of sweat that's a musky odor. And the serous glands and mammary glands also are modified apocrine glands. Burns, so we'll talk about how burns can affect the structure of the skin. They're classified by their severity. We can have a first-degree burn where only the upper epidermis is damaged, so that's first degree. Second-degree burn is where the upper part of the dermis is also damaged. We might get some blisters, skin heals with little scarring, and this is the tough one. The third-degree burn consumes the whole thickness of the skin, and the burned area might appear white, red, or black. So here's a look at skin bearing partial thickness burns with first and second degree, and this is obviously much different. This is a third degree burn here. The rule of nines is used to estimate the extent of the burns in terms of how far the burn has traveled. Then skin cancer is the most common type of cancer, so please use sunscreen. Basal cell carcinoma is the least malignant, so that's the least cancerous. Malignant means cancerous and the most common. Squamous cell carcinoma arises from keratinocytes, and melanoma is the cancer of the melanocytes, and this is the most dangerous type of skin cancer. So here's a look at basal cell carcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma, and melanoma. So keep these in mind. This is why it's always maybe good to see a dermatologist once a year. And if you have any sort of strange looking moles or freckles, they can take a biopsy of it to see if they are malignant or cancerous. So the skin throughout the life, the epidermis develops from embryonic ectoderm, the dermis and hypodermis develop from mesoderm, and melanocytes develop from neural crest cells. Fetal skin, I'm going to let you guys read over this. We won't cover a lot of fetal embryology and development because embryology and the life in the womb could almost be a whole separate class. But as we age into our old age, the skin thins and becomes less elastic. It shows harmful effects of environmental damage, and skin inflammations can become more common. And that's chapter 5, a little bit shorter. I hope you guys are doing well, and good luck studying for your first lecture and lab exam.